May. I am a planner on the UDO team with the city's planning department. Thank you for being here for this evening's virtual update regarding the UDO and the second draft, or as we like to call it, the public hearing draft for the UDO. I think what we'd like to do before we get too far into the meeting is it appears that there is some limited amount of members of the public here. I see Andy, John Friday, Kyle Brooks, and Douglas Welton. And rather than go through this as we formulaically or traditionally would, we'd like to, before we get started, open it up and maybe have you guys let us know if there's something specific that you'd like to discuss or ask about, rather than go through a whole slide deck and still maybe at the end of it not necessarily get where you wanted to go with the conversation. So with that, I'd welcome John, if you'd like to go first and just give us an idea as to what you'd like to hear about.
Sure, as soon as I can make this thing work.
We hear you great.
Evan, Laura, and Alan, y'all have done a great job on this. And I have certainly not gone all the way through it yet, but I do have some questions about very specific things. Can I just ask those?
Absolutely. I see no reason why we can't go ahead and get started with what you'd like to speak.
So under definitions, the word adjacent talks about 100 foot or less in width. Is that applying to the roads and rivers and so forth, or is that applying to the lot line? And that's something you can go back and look at. I'm just asking the question. I'm a little confused as how it's worded. Drive-through establishments were deleted. Why? Floor areas were deleted. Why? And fenestration was deleted. Why? Because as I look back at other areas, I'm trying to see how fenestration is now defined. And I know you took them out for a reason, probably because duplicates of some other description. I just couldn't find that.
Sure. So well, thank you for those, John. And I'll go ahead and speak to the fenestration piece because I had worked on that definition, and then also I think kind of had fingerprints on why that was removed. And as we reviewed the second draft, or the first draft rather, to formulate the second draft, and as we were looking at kind of pain points, one of them became fenestration. And very initially, we had a very intentional reason why we wanted to include it with regard to standards in the signage chapter. And we found that we also were trying to use a similar type term in other places in the zoning ordinance. And it got to be between having a little bit of an incongruity with trying to apply it as we intended in the signs piece, and then trying to also use it in other pieces for zoning standards. It was just harder than just being more explicit and saying a clear pane of glass. And so for clarity and for a little bit of increased congruity and meeting basically the same intent without necessarily having to use a fancier term than glazing or glass, we decided to cut it.
So if we say in the ordinance that you can, I don't know, make a wall better by having fenestration or doors or whatever, that word just isn't defined? Or
I don't think we use the term.
I think when we talked about, thank you for that, Laura. And I think when we had this discussion about the term fenestration, John, and Mariah on our team is here and can help me with this as well, because she kind of oversaw the definitions chapter. We had seen, I think it had only occurred with 3 uses in the draft UDO. One was the definition itself, and the other 2 had to do in the signs regulations, and then the new regulations for the adult gaming or entertainment establishment, the arcade. I forget what it's specifically called in the UDO, but it was only used in those 3 instances.
Okay. That surprised me. That's all.
Sure.
John, let me jump back to your first question about the definition of adjacent. And if you will indulge me, I'll share the screen.
Please.
And we can see they're marked up. revised version of adjacent. I hope you can see that. I'll try to make it a little bit bigger. Well, that might be a little too big. Let me back it down a notch. Right in the middle of the screen.
Yes.
The revised definition of adjacent is having common property boundaries or lot lines directly across the street or located directly across a street, alley, railroad, other transportation corridor, or body of water 100 feet or less in width. Does that do anything to help you clarify?
And that's what I read. So you were not referring to the property boundary or lot line 100 feet.
No.
Maybe
It's
we
the
should have put
street
a
or
colon.
alley or-
Yeah, maybe
Got
we
it.
should have put a colon after lot lines to make it, to separate those two thoughts.
I now understand what you meant. And of course, I did not read it that way when I read it. So, okay.
All right.
And why was floor area deleted? Is it defined differently in, like, gross area is meant to replace floor area?
We have a definition of gross floor area. And I have to admit, I was not aware that we deleted the old definition of floor area. So we did delete the old definition of floor area. Laura or Mariah, do you remember, is the definition of gross floor area intended to replace that?
So when we were going through definitions, wherever we used floor area in the UDO, it was in reference to gross floor area. So we stuck with the gross floor area definition because we didn't feel we needed one for just floor area alone.
Okay. As long as you don't have floor area as any kind of descriptive part of the UDO. I'm used to floor area as an architect, so, and gross floor area, and they're slightly different, but that doesn't mean from a UDO zoning perspective they are. So that's fine. I just was asking the question to make sure that we hadn't deleted one thing and hadn't modified something to replace it. So I will go to 16.6A noise.
John,
Okay.
one thing I don't think you got
Yes.
an answer to on the drive-through establishment, that's in the use definitions. It shouldn't have been in these definitions. So just to let you-
Okay. Okay. All right. That makes sense. Under 16.6A noise, I made the comment that I was very concerned that that is defined around use. And there are things like fans and generators from personal experience that are very noisy that are not a use. And the staff response at the end of the first draft was use is inclusive of any noise generated by equipment on the site. That is not what the city attorney told me when the fans in the parking deck behind my lot, we couldn't sleep at night. And so luckily the developer and the architect, when they came and stood in the backyard and heard it and the blood drained out of their face, they went, oh, we have a problem. I don't understand why we wouldn't put that in this definition, that you do intend that other things, not just use. Because if you go to use, we have use accessory, we have use principal, we have use temporary. Article 15 talks about the use matrix. There's no mention of fans, generators, pumps. And there's a particular project that I've heard about where they intend to put 38 generators on the roof for the 38 individual units in case of a power outage. And the neighbors are already concerned about, can they even do that? And my response was, well, as long as they can deal with the noise of it. It just seems like this is an opportunity to give you guys some leverage should a situation occur that was really unintended.
Let me also, let me share screen again so we can all look at that definition of, or the section rather of the ordinance that you were referencing. It is in Article 16, the general development standards, and specifically 16.7A, noise. No use shall be operated so as to generate recurring noises that are unreasonably loud, cause injury, or create a nuisance to any person of ordinary sensitivities. Within the city's boundaries, noise occurring activities shall also be in conformance with Chapter 15, Article 3 of the City Code. I can't claim to know what Article 15, or rather Chapter 15 of Article 3 of the City Code is. I'm wondering if that doesn't get to the issue that you're raising, if it's not in the UDO, but rather in another section of the City Code. Any member of the team have any?
I do remember what I found out back. Deborah was planning director at the time, and I don't know if that article's been updated since then. But basically, you know, it dealt with like a rock band next door or something really major. But a fan that is so shrill, you have to cover your ears to be in the backyard, really wasn't covered because the police couldn't come and run a noise, whatever they have.
Yeah.
It wasn't a decibel thing. It was something else entirely. And I remember the architect from Atlanta said, if your ordinance had had anything in there about fans or whatever, our mechanical team would have given that some thought. And I apologize that they did not, and we will fix it. And they did. But, you know, I live in Dilworth and I was on planning commission. I'm not sure in other parts of the city that it would have ended up that way.
The way I would read this, and I think it is an interpretation of the ordinance, is that no use shall be operated so as to generate recurring noises that are unreasonably loud, blah, blah, blah. So if you have a multifamily use and it is being operated in a manner that generates recurring noises, I think, you know, and someone has to go out and determine that, then I don't know what happened before, but I think this language should have that covered, because it's not the use that's generating the recurring, it's the operation of the use, whether it's a fan or whatever is going on in conjunction with that use.
Well, I like your interpretation. And
no, I was getting there too. Laura.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think we're covered. The no use shall be operated. I mean, I think it can encompass a wide variety of, you know, any noises that are generated within that use, by that use, or in conjunction with the use, or as part of, you know, a generator or a fan or anything that's part of the use. I mean, I think that's how, I don't want to speak for the zoning administrator, but I think that's probably what he would also interpret.
Okay.
Well, and I'll also, this is Kevin, I'll also say that there may even be some additional protections in Chapter 15 of the Code of Ordinances, because that has been updated, John, since Deborah was director. I think they was updated in 19. It wasn't too long ago, 19 or 20, it was updated.
Okay, I'll go read it, because having had a personal experience with it, I would like to make sure that's covered for the rest of the city.
Sure. And if you'd permit me, John, just in the interest of getting to some of our other speakers, I think you've had the floor, so to speak, for 10 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Fair enough. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I muted myself. I don't know why I did that. I'm going to go down to our participant lists, and the next one I see with us today is Andy Zoutwell. If you'd like to come off and maybe give us some context as what you'd like to hear and discuss tonight.
Yeah, I'm a little more down in the weeds as a land surveyor. I'm interested in the new UDO in the sense of protecting my clients, making sure that any plats we create or site plans we prepare for development on parcels conforms to the Euclidean standards in the ordinance. Not so much the form-based, that's more people like John, I guess, but we want to make sure that we're honoring setbacks and widths and that sort of thing. So if you have any insight, general insight, obviously there can be a lot of details in the text itself that I need to read through, but if you have any general insight along the way, I'd be interested in that. Sure.
Thanks for that context. And I'll kind of kick us off if there's anybody on the team that'd like to respond, and I'll say, Andy, that I think what we tried to do, at least with some of the plat recordation requirements in the subdivision article, is we tried to clean that up and bring it a little bit up to date, whereas it was very paper reliant, submit paper applications and so forth. And we try to incorporate the more modern way of doing things, as well as try to clean up some of the requirements that may currently exist in the subdivision ordinance that weren't necessarily needed going forward. So hopefully, you'll find that with that updating, cleanup, and modernization, that maybe what you need to do physically as you work on plats for recordation gets a little easier. I'll also say that, with the very basics like setbacks and easements and everything like that, not a lot necessarily has changed. I will say that there are probably some additional requirements, if not in subdivision and other parts of the UDO, that may have to, and this is where I would lean on the team a little bit, may have to be put on those plats that are submitted. And then I'll also say, just by the sheer nature of kind of where we're going with, form and standards, that, there may be some additional review requirements that, I couldn't really say one way or the other would impact the timing of things as they're submitted. I know that's a lot of fuzzy information and not a lot of certainties, but it's hard to kind of try to extrapolate for the situation that you're talking about for something that's not yet in effective, regulatory use. Alan, Laura, did you have anything additionally, or the rest of the team, that you'd like to add to Andy's questions?
Yeah. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Alan.
Haven't seen you in a long time. Good to see you. I just wanted to point out that regarding the terminology, for example, in the residential, or actually in the entire UDO, has changed from our current ordinance terminology in terms of setbacks. So we now call the side yard and the rear yard the side setback and the rear setback in the UDO. And at least in our neighborhood 1 zoning districts, which are kind of the equivalent of our R3, R4, R5 type of zoning districts, we're measuring the front setback from the street right of way as we do now. But in most of our other districts, we measure it from the back of the sidewalk, or typically the back of the sidewalk, but it's based on the cross section of the street found in the Charlotte Streets map. So I didn't know if you were aware of that, but that's some good information to have, just a slight change in terminology so that you don't go looking for the rear lot, the number for the rear lot. It's now called the rear setback.
Your yards versus setbacks, yeah. And measuring, that's big in all the districts except for the single family, as Alan was saying. Setbacks are measured from future back of curb.
Thank you, Laura.
Different, yeah.
That's
on the right of way line.
That's always a challenge for me in drafting a plat and determining where that setback is, because I don't know where the future back of curb necessarily would be. If there's a clear small area plan that I can go to and see the cross section, then I can ascertain where that is. But a lot of times, in mud or U-mud or something like that, and if there's no small area plan with a streetscape, cross section, then I don't know where that is. It's probably in CDOT's ordinance, but
it'll actually be for the bigger streets on the Charlotte Streets map, and then it is defined in the subdivision streets and infrastructure for the local streets.
In the new UDO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And I also noticed that flag lots are going to be prohibited. What is there any limit on that? I think I posted a comment that a flag lot, if you have the larger the flag lot, I'm wondering if that's the intent for somebody who has maybe a narrower area of land, even a wide area of land, but narrower than a larger area in the back. Would that be a flag lot, or is a flag lot intended to be a real small lot that's being wedged into a limited area. So just a thought.
Andy, I'll take a crack at this and Laura correct me, but I think in the terms for which you were describing it, we're thinking flagpole and large flag, not the small that would be wedged in wherever.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Well, I think so. In other words, could a
Where-
flag lot be 100 acres with a 500-foot wide pole that then widens to thousands of feet in width in the back?
I hear you. You're talking about matters of scale when it comes to
Yeah,
it, really.
yes.
Gotcha. Sure. Okay, and I think I do recall seeing you submit that comment, and I can't think of anything additionally offhand, Laura. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at the draft UDO, trying to make my way up towards definitions, because I know this was talked about to about the 12th hour, Andy.
I'm doing the same thing. I mean, I think truly if it's 500 acres and it can be subdivided and the subdivision, I mean, 500 acres, you're going to have a street coming in there on that width. This is really, intended to be house behind a house situation. And,
where the width of the pool might not necessarily meet the minimum width in the CLDSM for a street type, and so relies on private access through a recorded easement.
Yeah, would it be helpful if I've got the definition of flag lot up? Would it be helpful to share the screen?
Please do. You beat me there to it. So.
Okay.
yeah, and on that, on the large, I was just thinking on the larger lot, you probably would meet the minimum lot width definition.
Yeah.
So a lot that honors the minimum lot width at the setback, at the required setback dimension, would not be a flag lot regardless of its irregular shape.
Yeah.
Typically not. I could say that if literally you just have a driveway, because some of our districts don't have minimum lot widths, so those would be looked at on a case-by-case basis, but our residential districts do.
Yeah.
Our lower intensity residential districts. And that's where you really see what we consider to be flag lots.
Right.
Andy, those were all great questions and discussions points. Did you have anything additionally?
No, I'm all ears for your presentation.
Okay. Very good. Thank you for being here this evening. Continuing down our participant list, it looks like I have Planning Commissioner Welton has joined us this evening. Sir, did you have anything that you'd like to hear, ask, or discuss tonight, or are you all ears?
Hey, everybody. I am mostly all ears this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I just want to hear, in general, what the public and the folks that are deep in the weeds in this conversation are having to say. I will make some comments that I'll send to you guys, electronically, that sort of thing. But mostly I'm here just to listen. And Andy and John have both provided some interesting things for me to go back and double check with, and just to make sure that those things get carried forward, as you guys will be carrying those forward as well. But I'm just being redundant. So that's me.
Well, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your engagement in the project and the process. Continuing down our participant list, it looks like I have a Kyle Brooks. Kyle, if you'd like to come off mute and perhaps give us an idea as to, in participating tonight, what you'd like to hear, discuss, or ask, we'd love to hear it.
Hey there, yeah. So my name is Kyle Brooks. I'm an architect here in the city, and the Uptown Streets map has been of particular interest to us as we have had some high density developments coming in. And so we're kind of watching how these UMUD rules are transitioning and how the new setbacks and different things will affect us. So just kind of looking at the updates, going through all the changes and stuff. it seems like there's some pretty progressive things going on with parking standards and the streetscape. So I've definitely appreciated some new awareness around what the streetscapes plans look like, especially for Uptown, because I think in the past that's been a little bit oblique or hard to find exactly what the streetscape expectations are as far as setbacks and parallel parking and all those kinds of things when it comes to UMUD developments, especially. So
Sure.
just, looking forward to you guys discussions and presentation on those kinds of things.
Sure. So there's a couple of things I thank you for being here tonight, Kyle. And there's a couple of things in your questions and comments to unpack. And just to be very clear, so there's the Charlotte Streets map, to which our team doesn't have ownership per se, that is being driven by the Charlotte Department of Transportation, but the UDO does lean heavily on by reference in some of the standards. And a smaller part of that is the Uptown streetscape, which was worked which was worked on and updated through the formulation of the second draft. And certainly the standards for that area within 277, although it may bleed over on that streets map, are something that we incorporated that were absent in the first draft that we incorporated into the second draft. And it gives, to your point, a lot of direction with regard to the standards for those Uptown street corridors and what the streetscapes look like. And that is also something that Uptown streets map, so to speak, is also something that is owned and being driven by the Charlotte Department of Transportation. Now with parking, I'd welcome Alan here in a minute to chime in as he sees fit. But what I'd like to do also is somebody that was very instrumental in putting the Uptown streetscape standards and working with CDOT on the Uptown streets map and how that would be fit into the UDO from the first iteration to the second is Mariah Wozniak on our team. And she is more of an authority on specifically what you were talking about, certainly, than I am. So Mariah, I'd welcome any comments that you have that you'd like to relay in response to Kyle's comments and questions.
Sure. I'm encouraged to hear that you're liking, I guess, the awareness to some of the design standards, I guess, in Uptown. What we really try to do is work across departments with CDOT and then in our own within our own department with the urban design folks to kind of bring everything together. So it's really just trying to fuse some existing plans that are already relied upon and the standards for Tryon Street Mall and things like that, and really bringing them into the UDO in one spot. And I'd be happy to answer any more specific questions that you have.
Yeah. Well. And I'll just piggyback on what Mariah is saying, and this is might be something that you have familiarity with, Kyle, in doing the development that you do and in the area of Uptown and UMUD, is if you're familiar at all with the current hieroglyphics map, so to speak, that is something that would be transitioned away from in favor and use of the new Uptown Streets map that is to be coming as part of CDOT's processes.
That is phenomenal. Yes, exactly. That's the hieroglyphics map is always a fun one to navigate. So thank you very much, Mariah, too, for your comments. I think this is going to be an ongoing process as we kind of figure out how this affects some of the developments that we have underway and how it'll affect design standards, just as you were saying. So it's a cool discovery process for us as well. So I just, thank you guys for doing this.
Certainly. Alan, was there any seasoning on this with regard to parking that you can contribute to Kyle's questions or comments?
Only that parking has been a kind of a hot topic of conversation among our UDO Advisory Commission, as well as our City Council and Planning Commission. And the views of parking and where the UDO should land on parking requirements have been from one extreme to the other. There has been some interest in eliminating all minimum parking requirements citywide, which some other communities across our country and state are doing or have done. And at the other end of the spectrum, there have also been, has been sentiment that we should maintain minimum parking just about everywhere. Where we landed with the second draft of the UDO is very close to where we were in the first draft with a few modifications. We have developed a 3-tier parking system where in tier 1, we include the lower intensity zoning districts, and those districts in tier 1 would have parking minimums, a minimum parking requirement based on their use, and no parking maximums. The zoning districts in tier 2 would have both a parking minimum and a maximum parking, and then the higher intensity districts, the more urban districts that are better served by transit and pedestrian networks and so forth, would be in tier 3 regarding parking. And those zoning districts would, for the most part, have no minimum parking requirements, but rather would have a maximum, a parking maximum. There are a couple of exceptions where those higher intensity districts are close to neighborhood 1 place types, but aside from that, very similar to what our current, some of our current TOD ordinance parking requirements are. I will note that we have reduced some of the minimum parking requirements from the first draft to the second draft of the UDO, but we have basically not changed the minimum parking requirements for residential uses in the tier 1 districts. So they have pretty much stayed the same. But some of our non-residential uses, we have reduced slightly the minimum parking requirements.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you, Alan and team, really. And I'll say that as far as those in attendance, it looks like that's everybody that is not staff that has joined us this evening. But I will say, please stick around because we've got questions that were submitted by registrants that may not be here tonight, that in the efforts of good faith and transparency, I think we'd like to read into the meeting and have a little discussion as needed. And then also I'd like you guys to be privy and aware of some of the other engagement events that we are planning for this. And we'll be sharing a little bit of information with regards to those engagement efforts, as well as some links that we'll put in the chat feature for you to connect with to find additional resources and details about those engagement activities and events. So
can I suggest that we also go through the slides that we did have for tonight so they can see what the folks at noon saw, and that may bring up some additional questions. There are not that many of them, so I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Alan, if you'd like to, actually, Alan, I think we've been so informal in this meeting. If you'd like just to skip right to the content areas, it'd probably be appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you can all see the title slide on your screen. So we'll skip over some of the formalities and go right to, Kevin, you were talking about the public input process and schedule. So if you want to quickly go through what we've got planned.
Yeah, fair enough. Again, thank you. And so speaking of the public input process and schedule, we opened the public comment portal for the second draft, also known as the hearing draft of the UDO, at the same date as released, which was on Friday, June 3rd. As I was saying, we've got several public engagement opportunities that are currently planned from that release date on June 3rd through the end of the month. We've got these virtual update sessions, of which you're in one tonight. We will have another 2 on Thursday, one during midday 12 to 1 and another one at a 6 to 7 hour. And we'll put those topics to be covered on Thursday in the chat so that if you're interested, you may register for those as well. Coming up tomorrow, in fact, we'd invite all of you with us this evening to stop by the Government Center from 2:30, 3 o'clock on. We're going to be having a UDO open house. where we will have some display boards and some draft copies of the UDO, as well as some subject matter experts. So we'd welcome an opportunity for you to stop by, maybe get your hands on a draft, look at some of the key changes, and maybe discuss some things in greater detail with subject matter experts. And then starting next week and a little bit into the week after, we're going to be having what we're calling our virtual office hours. These are set up at various times throughout that 7 days, and they focus on specific topic areas of the UDO. So for instance, if you had additional questions or comments that you'd like to make with regard to subdivision, streets, and infrastructure, if you go to the engagement link that Mariah has put in the chat, you'll see an opportunity to register for those subdivision, streets, and other infrastructure office hours. Lastly, as we go through all of the public input and engagement process, UDO staff will be responding the best that we can to the feedback that we receive, but then also trying to identify themes and summarizing comments of the feedback that we've received and packaging them for City Council and the Planning Committee of the Planning Commission during their deliberations on any future UDO vote and or UDO recommendation. Next slide.
Thanks, Kevin. Let's see, next slide.
I think it's the timetable, maybe.
There we go. Yep, there we go.
Yep. So as I was saying, the draft, the second draft was released on June 3rd. We are currently this week, now and Thursday, having those virtual update sessions. Again, tomorrow we're having that open house at the Government Center. Next week, I spoke about the virtual office hours. The public comment portal for the second draft will close on June 30th at the end of this month. And 3 very key dates towards the middle of July, we'll be having a public hearing in front of both the City Council and Planning Committee of the Planning Commission. On July 11th, we will then go forward to seek a Planning Committee recommendation of the draft UDO on July 19th, anticipating a decision from City Council at their August 22nd meeting. Just rewinding it for a brief second and giving some context. We've been working on the formulation of the second draft since the first draft released in October of 2021. Our team has received over 1,200 comments from community members and stakeholders, as well as numerous rounds of feedback from the City Council and Planning Commission. We've also received very valuable feedback and input from our UDO Advisory Commission. And also our partners across different departments in the city and the county have also submitted for our review and consideration over 600 comments. Should be no surprise that the second draft of the UDO builds off the first and includes new and updated concepts and approaches that is going to be important for the Charlotte community. And just a little explainer, a little primer, if you're not familiar with how our red line draft works. The red line draft will indicate text additions in blue underlined text and removed or to be omitted future text with red strike throughs. Also scattered throughout will be some explanatory editor's notes that give context for where maybe whole sections have been moved, and rather to display that move, it's just easier to explain in an editor's note.
Thanks, Kevin. I'll take over. So we've got a few slides on some areas of the UDO that have undergone some significant or impactful changes from the first draft to the second draft. And I won't read the list because we'll go through and have a slide for each of these. And then we'll do several other areas at Thursday's meeting. And I think at some point, Mariah can put in the chat what the topics for Thursday's meeting will be. But for now, we'll just go through these significant changes and we'll do them pretty quickly. The first thing to talk about is that we have created a new campus zoning district. In addition to the 3 campus zoning districts that were in the first draft, this one is a research campus, abbreviated as RC1. And we put this in based on feedback, particularly from areas like the University Research Park, to accommodate large-scale research campuses in a mixed-use environment. And this particular mix of uses in the research campus district would not necessarily be allowed in any of the other 3 campus districts. And so we felt that we needed a new campus district. It would be characterized by typically taller buildings, but still within a pedestrian-oriented urban environment. The next change is the maximum sidewall height for infill dwellings in neighborhood 1 zoning districts. Received a lot of attention and conversation in review of the first draft. What this does is seeks to limit the sidewall height of a new infill dwelling in a residential neighborhood to either 12 feet, or if the dwellings on either side of the new infill home are taller than 12 feet, you can average the sidewall heights of the buildings on either side, and perhaps your sidewall height could be taller than 12 feet. And then you can go as tall as that height plane allows, as long as you stay within the maximum height of the zoning district. The feedback that we received was that the 12-foot max did not allow for necessarily the development of 2-story duplexes and triplexes, which would be allowed by right in those neighborhood 1 zoning districts under the UDO. So we have modified that and increased that minimum, or rather maximum, keep saying minimum, sidewall height from 12 feet to 20 feet in the second draft. It would apply to not only the neighborhood 1 zoning districts, but also to our residential infill overlay district. The next is a new type of historic district, a Streetside Historic District, a new concept for Charlotte, but not new. Other communities are doing a similar Streetside Historic District. It will try to preserve the character of neighborhoods on the street-facing side, but allow for more flexibility. So it basically regulates the first 50% of the building and the property, the street side 50%, so that new development or renovations would on the street side, the first half, would need to comply with the standards of the historic district, but in the rear 50% of the dwelling or the building or the property, those historic district regulations would not apply. So you could do additions or renovations to the rear 50% without having to worry about complying with HDC regulations. We've modified the height transition from the first draft to the second, and this would occur where you have a higher intensity development occurring adjacent to a residential use in a neighborhood 1 place type. So if you had a taller building or a zoning district that would allow for taller buildings adjacent to a neighborhood 1 residential use. The first draft, which is the graphic on the top, and I know that you can't read all of those small labels, but you could see it if you went into the draft UDO, would allow a new development to be 65 feet in height for the first 200 feet from that property line of that residential use. So as long as you met your rear or your side lot horizontal dimension, then that building could go all the way to 65 feet for the first 200 feet. And then after you get 200 feet away from that neighborhood 1 lot line, the development could go as tall as that zoning district would allow. We've modified that in the lower drawing to show that for the first 100 feet from the lot line of that neighborhood 1 place type, the new development could only go to 50 feet in height. And then once you get 100 feet away, it could step up to 65 feet. And then for another 100 feet, it could then go up to the full height of that zoning district. So essentially what you have is a little stair step, which puts a lower building height closer to the residential and then gradually gets taller until, again, when you're 200 feet from that lot line, the development can rise to whatever height would be allowed in the zoning district. We've also increased the maximum height from the first draft to the second draft. In some zoning districts, typically in our centers zoning districts, our most urban or most intense zoning districts, as well as our urban campus district, the IC2 district, and also increased the maximum height with bonus points for a number of districts. And the increases in height in these districts can be minor, things like, in some districts, we've only increased it by 5 feet. In others, we've increased it by up to 50 feet. So when you go into the red line of each zoning district is in a separate article, and each zoning district article has a table with a maximum building height. And so you'll be able to tell based on the red line markup where those maximum heights have changed. And so you can see what we've done there by looking at the graph. I also wanted to mention quickly that we have reduced the minimum building height in the neighborhood center district, the NC district, because it is a less intense district compared with our other center zoning districts. And so we've reduced the minimum building height in that district from 24 feet to 16 feet. Short-term rentals, such as Airbnbs or Vrvos, the first draft had a series of proposed regulations ensuring that how these were operated and registered and received zoning permits and so forth. And there were several requirements in there that generated a lot of discussion in the community, both in favor of regulating short-term rentals and vehemently opposed to regulation. There is a lawsuit, or was a lawsuit in Wilmington regarding short-term rentals. And we think that there may be future state legislation regarding the regulation of short-term rentals. So in light of that, our attorney's office has advised that for the time being, we refrain from proposing any short-term rental regulations at this time. So if you look in the second draft, you will see that all of the previous short-term rental regulations have been struck. And I believe, Kevin, they were in the prescribed conditions section of Article 15.
Yes, that's correct.
Thanks. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we won't revisit this and draft some appropriate regulations on short-term rentals once we get clearer legal advice going forward. I mentioned the bonus menu a couple of slides ago. The development bonus options are something that we are currently using in our TOD districts, and they allow for development to gain additional building height over and above what the normal height would be allowed for that district, or in some cases, a reduction in the amount of required open space. So in the first draft, we expanded the use of the bonus options from the TOD districts to several of the other zoning districts. And then from the first draft to the second, I should mention that we've expanded the menu of options in the first draft, and we've further expanded it in the second draft. And I won't read through all of those, but you can see those 4 bullet points in bold. Those are the expanded options from the first draft to the second. We think that this will give development more flexibility and earning bonus points, at the same time allowing us to advance our city priorities like affordable housing and some other goals. And speaking of affordable housing, the second draft provides some incentives for providing affordable housing and development, such as utilizing the standards of a different zoning district, if that works better, and there are some limitations on that, but it is in the draft. Adjustments to the requirement to build streets, reimbursement for sidewalks along public streets if there is a requirement for that development to build sidewalks, as well as alternative standards for meeting green area and heritage tree protection. And green area was known as tree save, and we are now calling it green area because it is a little bit more than tree save. So our old tree save will be called green area in the UDO. That's my last slide.
Thank you, Alan. And I just wanted to make a quick clarification since this is being recorded and we will share this. Alan misspoke rather, just slightly there, just for clarity and to be very explicit, there were no registration requirements ever proposed as part of the short-term rental regulations. We were very explicit, but there were no registration requirements.
Sorry, Kevin, as soon as I said it, I knew I misspoke.
That's
what
okay.
I meant to say is that we would have required a zoning use permit.
Right. Very good. So now having seen the slide deck and before I advance perhaps to some of the questions that were submitted during registration, I'll open up back up to our attendees and our participants. Now that you've seen those slides, is there anything that you'd perhaps like to speak on with regard to that slide deck? And feel free to raise your hand or give an indication. Kyle, I see that you've put a question in the chat. Does the Streetside zoning district, and this sounds like it's the new Streetside Historic District, would that apply to all current historic district overlays or override those regulations?
It would be a brand new overlay district. So current historic districts, it would not apply to them. It would apply if a neighborhood wanted to apply for a Streetside Historic District overlay in the future. They could do that, or they could apply for a traditional historic district overlay, but we would not go back to existing historic districts and apply a streetside zoning district. This question came up yesterday in a meeting that we were in, and we specifically asked our HDC staff what would happen if an existing historic district wanted to change and only do the street side zoning district. And it would be a process of having to decertify the existing historic district, which would be a rather involved process and may not be supported. So Laura, you were part of that conversation. Do you have any more insight about that process other than to say it probably wouldn't happen?
I think you're right, Alan. The intention is not to take current historic districts and go to the street side. It's really to look at where are new locations where this would be appropriate and desirable.
Yeah, thank you for that. I very much appreciate the kind of simplification of the process for establishing new potential historic districts, in more established neighborhoods. In terms of the, front 50%, back 50%, is there any stipulation as to the sight lines from the street? So say you were to have a one-story, lower scale house, and you made an addition that was 3 stories off the back of it, but it was, the back 50%, but very visible, from the street. Are there any guidelines as to sight lines from the street to kind of prevent those sorts of additions? And we are seeing that kind of thing across Charlotte already as well.
I don't, and Laura, I'm going to share my screen again because there is I think a helpful illustration in the draft for the historic Streetside Historic District. And without absolutely knowing the answer to your question, Kyle, just based on the illustration, and I think it's correct. You can see that the addition, even though it is in the rear 50% of the property, it is colored in that gray color, which means it is subject to review. I don't know if that is because it is visible from the street or not. I have to be honest, I have not gone through the entire Streetside Historic District overlay to know the answer to your question. Maybe as I'm stalling for time here.
That one's the one that is entirely in the gray, Alan, is a corner lot. You can see the right of way on the side lot line. The other one is an interior lot, but that is a great question because I think this came to us from our historic district staff. I'd like for us to go back and get that answer for them and see if we need to get some clarity in the UDO about what can be done on that second half as far as the back half of the property as far as height goes, if that's okay.
That's great. Thank you for that clarification. And I'll definitely look through the wording as well and see if I can get an answer there too. Thank you.
Yeah, and now that you've raised that question with us, we will also look at that. Thank you.
Great questions. Good discussion. Thank you, Kyle. Anybody else with us in attendance? Do you have anything that you'd like to bring up after seeing the deck?
Kevin, this is John. I would just like to commend all of you. The effort that has been taken on for the past 6 years to put this together is monumental, and y'all have done a terrific job in answering people's questions, in being transparent, in putting this out. I'm sorry we don't have 100 citizens on here, but those of us that are here really do appreciate the tremendous effort that's been made to bring our 1970s document into the current world. It's a very nice document. I think Andy will be very pleased as he does his work at how organized it has become. Good job. Very good job. Thank
Well,
you.
John, I'm going to defer to our project manager to take all of those accolades, Laura. So Laura, take it away.
No, I was going to say two of the three folks on tonight are former planning commissioners that have encouraged us along the way to get this done. So we appreciate that. We have a really great team, both in planning and then throughout the city that's been working on this. And we're looking forward to getting it hopefully adopted in August and
Absolutely
implementing it next year.
It's good to see all of you, and let me know when I can come visit you in person. Sounds like tomorrow.
Tomorrow at the open house. Yeah. Well, very good. Since we're starting to get to the top of the hour and 7 o'clock, I'd like to get these questions that were submitted during registration onto the recording. And they seem to be probably ones that can be handled without a lot of discussion. So I'll kick this off and I'll read the first one. And this is the registrant's wording and phrasing. So has the lottery /400 square foot rule been removed from the draft? If not, why not? And I'm going to say that I'm going to make an assumptive leap that this was in regard to the 400 foot separation buffer that had been proposed as part of the short-term rental regulations and the prescribed conditions. And if that is the case, with all of that language being struck, then that 400 foot buffer has also been struck and is also now in abeyance as we await further clarity. The next question we had was with regard to some definitions, specifically SRO and ADU definitions do not appear to provide for renting out a single room in one's home. And I will say in answer to that, that is correct. The SRO and ADU definitions and their prescribed conditions do not explicitly speak to renting out of single rooms in a house. And it's for the very simple reason that the current zoning ordinance in the UDO going forward is not proposed to regulate that type of activity. So if you own your home and you want to rent out a single room in your home, then you're more than free to do so. We don't regulate it to that extent. And then lastly, and I'll defer this to Alan or Laura, whoever would like to have it, is why can we not keep R3 zoning?
Yeah, I'll jump in. We have an equivalent neighborhood zoning district, neighborhood 1 zoning district to R3. It is the N1A district. And when I say equivalent, the dimensional standards are very similar to the current R3. The major difference is that in the N1A, duplex and triplex dwellings will be allowed by right, whereas in R3, they would not be. And this is in keeping with the adopted policy of the comprehensive plan that single family duplex and triplex dwellings should be allowed on any parcel that could accommodate a residential use. So other than that, and it's a very big distinction, the dimensional standards of the N1A district are very similar in terms of setbacks and building height and maximum lot coverage and so forth to our current R3 district. So we have something that can look like R3, but with the obvious change to allow duplexes and triplexes. Or did I hit enough of those points?
Great job.
Okay.
Well, very good. Thank you for that explanation, Alan. And that tolls the questions that were submitted through registration. So unless there's any other last comments, questions, or discussion points, we will adjourn 1 minute late, but that's not too bad for a city meeting. And we'll bid you adieu for the rest of your evening. And we look forward to you guys visiting us tomorrow during the open house and engaging with us further in the process. Andy, I'm especially thinking, oh, he's gone already. Dang. Bye, y'all. Have a good evening.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Okay, looks like everyone left on their own.